scholar at the universities of Oxford, Notre Dame, and Quebec. He has authored and edited several books, including the volumes Vaiṣṇava Concepts of God, Philosophical Perspectives, and Beyond Faith and Rationality, Essays on Logic, Religion, and Philosophy. He has authored over 40 papers and book chapters on logic, philosophy of religion, and epistemology. He is currently the president of the Logic and Religion Association, LARA, and a professor at the Federal University of Campina Grande and the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, both in Brazil. He was the principal investigator of the project, A Philosophical Approach to the Vaiṣṇava Concept of God, and is the leader of the project Concepts of God and Varieties of Theisms in Indian Traditions towards the Theistic Theory of Consciousness, funded by the John Templeton Foundation. Great privilege for us. Without much delay, let me welcome Professor Ricardo Silvestre.
Okay. So, good evening. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the organizers for organizing such an amazing conference, as well as thank them for inviting me. So, my goal today will be somewhat modest. Instead of talking about some of the few works I have written on Vaiṣṇavism, I would like to talk a little about a volume that will be published in December of this year by Routledge. It is called Vaiṣṇava Concepts of God, Philosophical Perspectives. It is co-edited by myself, Alan Herbert, and Benedict Gog. Distinguished scholars such as Edwin Bryan, Gavin Flood, Angelica Malina, Ananda Vaidya, and Frederick Smith contribute to the volume. My colleague Alan Herbert and I are co-authors of 2 chapters in the volume, one on panentheism in the Bhagavad Gita, and the other on the concept of God in Jiva Goswami, the 16th century seminal thinker in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. I pasted the link of the book description in the Routledge website in the chat. So if you want to take a look at it, the book is right now available for pre-order. It's also that the book is one of the outcomes of the project, A Philosophical Approach to the Vaiṣṇava Concept of God, led by me and funded by the John Templeton Foundation through the Global Philosophy of Religion project, hosted by the University of Birmingham. I have also pasted the link to the project website in the chat, in case you want to take a look at it. But more than talking about the book itself, I want here to talk about the motivation behind it, and what we consider to be its unique contribution to the scholarship on Vaiṣṇavism. That has to do with the philosophical debate about the concept of God. Indian theologians in general, and Vaishnava thinkers in particular, have provided many powerful philosophical insights about God and the ultimate reality. On the other hand, Western philosophy of religion has developed many useful philosophical tools for evaluating conceptions of God. So there's no reason why these two fields cannot benefit from each other. On the contrary, the need for what many people call cross-cultural or global philosophy of religion seems to be stronger than ever. So in a way, my aim here is to draw your attention to the need to look at Vaishnavism in general, and the Vaiṣṇava concept of God in particular, in a way that takes into account the tools and issues that Western philosophers of religion have been concerned with. In a nutshell, I would say that my main goal here is to draw your attention to some of the questions we should pose if we want to philosophically analyze Vaishnavism within such a cross-cultural framework. But although these debates, that's an important point, the debates concerning concepts of God, they have regained considerable momentum in Western philosophy of religion since the 60s, they mainly focus on concepts of God growing out of the Abrahamic religions and philosophical traditions informed by Western theology. The modus operandi of this debate is best described as being firmly based on the analysis of divine attributes. On this approach, a concept of God is evaluated in relation to a variety of exegetically discovered or philosophically justified attributes apparently worth of the divine, such as perfection, omniscience, omnipotence, eternity, and so on and so forth. Hence, the question of what God is like is equivalent to asking, what attributes does God possess? A further, equally important question naturally follows. For a divine attribute X, what does it mean to say that God possesses X? Different answers to either or both of these questions give rise to different concepts of God.
Western philosophers who have followed this strategy have typically been guided by the idea that God is a maximally great, excellent, or perfect being. Augustine, 4th century, and Anselm, 11th century, remain the paradigmatic examples of this approach. While Augustine saw God as that being than which nothing more excellent or exalted exists, Anselm saw God as that being than which nothing greater can be taught. Some contemporary philosophers offer as the greatest possible being. The notion of greatness, excellence, or perfection with regard to knowledge, for instance, implies that it is better being knowledgeable than not being knowledgeable. It thus follows that if God is the greatest possible being, God must also be the greatest possible knowledgeable being. As perfection, this amounts to saying that God is perfectly knowledgeable or omniscient. This approach is what is presently referred to as perfect being theology. Some of these ideas on God's perfection eventually led to the concept of God that is associated with classical theism. Pantheism, panentheism, and deism also represent an additional threefold theistic category from which a number of alternative theories of God can be derived. Each of them potentially holds a distinct position on the above questions, which results in further concepts of God. Nevertheless, to some extent, they all also incorporate this basic tenet of perfect being theology, which is that God, in one way or other, comprises perfection or greatness. Perfect being theology, along with all its associated theories, is concerned with monotheistic concepts of God, rather than with the concept of a God, for example. Its association with monotheism is not partial or tentative, nor is monotheism relevant to only a select number of perfect being theorists. Monotheistic concepts of God are central to traditional philosophical debates on the rationality of theism. When Western philosophers argue for or against the existence of God, or for or against the coherence of the concept of God, for instance, a monotheistic view is explicitly or implicitly presupposed. Although Western philosophy of religion, I already mentioned that, has developed many useful philosophical tools for evaluating Abrahamic concepts of God as they apply to respective philosophical tradition, there's a growing awareness that such monotheistic Western approaches might conceal and prohibit a culturally sensitive and philosophically adequate appreciation of the numerous concepts of God found in religious traditions outside the Abrahamic landscape. This awareness, which is part of the motivation beyond cross-cultural or global philosophy of religion, requires that new dialogues between Western philosophy of religion and non-Western traditions take place. Vaiṣṇavism is commonly referred to as one of the great Hindu monotheistic traditions. The principal deity the tradition devotes itself is, as the name suggests, Vishnu, though it also includes his different forms such as Narayana and Krishna, the latter sometimes considered primary. Shaivism and Shaktism, respectively, honoring the god Shiva and the goddess in her various forms, including Durga, Kali, Mahadevi, make up the two other larger monotheistic Hindu traditions. In addition to often being considered monotheistic, concepts of God in Vaishnavism are also frequently depicted through divine attributes, this sometimes resembling the general approach of Western philosophy of religion I just mentioned. While appealing to Vedanta exegetical tradition for justification, explanation, for instance, many Vaishnavas have defended the thesis that Brahma, the ultimate, omnipresent, and singular reality, which they identify with Vishnu, is Saguna, with qualities, with properties. And it seems these Vaishnava Vedantins never tired of enumerating these qualities. Madhva, 13th century, for instance, states in his Vishnu Tattva Nirnaya, 461, that, I quote him, the creator must be omniscient, omnipotent, and capable of falling wherever he wills. This is what being a Brahman with quality means. In his turn, Ramanuja, 11th century, write in his Vedhartha Sangraha 10 and 14 as follows. Now I quote Ramanuja, all the perfect attributes which according to other contexts belong to Brahma, those myriads of immeasurable glories and innumerable perfections like omniscience, omnipotence, universal sovereignty, his being equal and unsurpassed, having all desires materialized in his will, always realized and being all illuminated. illuminating, as well as his absolute freedom from evil. Always known when one is known, the one whose proper form is solely knowledge, bliss, and perfection, whose greatness is immeasurable, who possesses boundless, unequally, and countless perfections, such as the power of having his will always realized, and who is essentially not subject to mutability. That is the Supreme Brahman itself. These are Eric Lott's translations from his Vedantic approach to God, both Ramanujas and Madhvas. It then seems reasonable to ask, according to Vaiṣṇavism, what attributes does God possess? Given the plurality of Vaishnava traditions, there will be most likely a range of answers for these questions, which will amount to a number of distinct Vaishnava concepts of God. In Ramanuja's quotation above, for instance, God is described as having the attributes of perfection, omniscience, omnipotence, greatness, and freedom from evil. What these attributes specifically mean has been the task of exegetical and philosophical analysis. The emphasis on God's perfection in Ramanuja's quotation is significant. Although we do not find in Ramanuja the explicit inferential moves found, for instance, in Anselm, Vaishnavism extends the explanatory strategy that strongly resembles perfect being theology. For instance, Vaishnava Vedantists often refer to the word Brahma as meaning that which is greater than the greatest, or that which has total greatness as its essential nature. To a lesser extent, interpretation of the word Bhagavan have similarly played similar roles. The Vishnu Purana 6.5, 69-76 defines Bhagavat, the Sanskrit stream of the normative singular Bhagavan, as follows. Now I quote Vishnu Purana. The essence of the Supreme is defined by the term Bhagavat. The word Bhagavat is the denomination of that primeval and eternal God. Bhagavat expresses that supreme spirit, which is individual, almighty, in the cause of all causes of all things. The word Bhaga indicates the six excellence, or six perfect attributes: dominion, might, glory, splendor, wisdom, and dispassion. The purport of the word, the expression Va, in that elemental spirit in which all beings exist and which exists in all beings. And thus this great word, Bhagavan, is the name of Vasudeva, who is one with the Supreme Brahma, and of no one else. This is a translation adapted from Taylor's The Vishnu Purana, Ancient Annals of the God with Lotus Eyes, published in 2021. This Vishnu Purana statement and its giving meaning for Bhagavat as the possessor of six qualities is quoted and associated with God as the perfect being by Vaishnavas, including Ramanuja and Jiva Goswami. On this understanding, we can infer that the general Vaishnava expression of God is very close to Descartes, the Western 17th century philosopher and famous perfect being theologian. In his fifth meditation, Descartes defines God as that who possesses all perfections, or as the most perfect being. We thus might ask, to what extent does Vaishnavism resort to a version of perfect being theology to construct its concept of God? It is, however, by no means uncontroversial to consider Vaishnavism a kind of classical theism, for instance, or an instance of perfect being theology. For example, the relationship between God and the world, in almost all variations of Vaishnava theology, looks very panentheist. In the text that they accept can be interpreted in this way too. In the Bhagavad Gita, for instance, Krishna is said to be identical with everything. Chapter 7, verse 19, and chapter 11, verse 40. Ramanuja is quite often referred to as a panentheist. Long before contemporary panentheists, Ramanuja used the body-soul analogy to describe the relationship between God and the world. He's claiming that the world is the body of God. It thus might be reasonable to ask, what are the similarities and differences between Vaishnava concepts of God and concepts of God associated with more traditionally Western forms of theism? Such questions and ruminations might seem irresistible. However, This is important. There is a consensus among Hindu studies scholars that using Western theological philosophical categories to analyze Indian religious traditions, such as Vaishnavism, might obfuscate some of their important and innate features. This could apply to the particular semantic and philosophical contexts within which terms like perfection, omniscience, omnipotence, eternity, etc. are understood. It could also apply to the claim that Vaishnavism is monotheist, although we find evidence for monotheism in many Vaishnava scriptural sources, such as the Bhagavad Gita itself, Bhagavad Purana, Vishnu Purana, some Upanishads, many Pancharatras and Agamas, as well as in the teachings of Vaishnavacharyas. Vaishnavism engages with the concept of God within several different contexts, we might say. First, Vaishnavism supports the idea that the Supreme Personal God, Vishnu, manifests himself in different divine forms, usually referred to as avatars, such as Krishna, Rama, and so on and so forth, and locates these forms within an ontological hierarchy. Second, Vaishnavism accepts other deities in the Hindu pantheon, including Brahma, Shiva, Durga, Indra, Varuna, Lakshmi, either placing them into a similar ontological hierarchy as the avatars, or consider them to be great or ideal devotees. Third, the relation between Vishnu and some of the other Hindu deities, notoriously Shiva and Lakshmi, is quite ambiguous. Sometimes these relationships are described in terms of identity and sometimes in terms of difference. And fourth, the relation between Vishnu and his energies, his Shaktis, is a major theme which has initiated its own set of controversies. While, for instance, Madhva emphasized a dualism whereby Vishnu differs from these energies or Shaktis. This is most Jiva's terminology. Other Vaishnavas that include Ramanuja, Nimbarga, and Jiva himself argue with slightly different implication that in some sense Vishnu is both different, Bheda, and non-different, Abheda, from them. Therefore, it seems legitimate to ask the following question. Is Vaishnavism really a monotheistic tradition? Or to put it in conceptual terms, is a specific Vaishnava concept of God monotheistic? If so, what kind of monotheism is at play here? Or in other words, what is the meaning of the word monotheist in the claim that a specific Vaishnava tradition is monotheistic? The same would apply to the claim that a specific Vaishnava tradition is panentheist, kenotheist, and so on and so forth. It is important to note that before we can philosophically address this question, this is perhaps my main point, or any of the above raised questions for that matter, we need to first attend to the question of how to characterize Vaishnava concepts of God. It seems that unless we have a minimally accurate characterization of a specific Vaishnava concept of God, no philosophical perspective on that concept of God. Okay, thus the following question seems to have priority. What is a specific Vaishnava concept of God? Or assuming that Vaishnava concepts of God are open to a divine attribute approach, what attributes does God possess, according to a particular Vaishnava textual source or tradition? Okay, now finally I'm going to speak a bit about the volume. So the general goal of our volume, the volume that I mentioned in the beginning, and I pasted the link in the chat. So its general goal is to approach the concepts of God found in a number of the principal Vaishnava traditions and texts in order to locate them within a global philosophical framework. The overall methodology is considerate of the progress made in contemporary philosophy of religion, Western contemporary philosophy of religion, especially in the analytic tradition, but is also aware of other methodologies. It is therefore sensitive towards the dangers of a Eurocentric analysis of non-Abrahamic religions. The goal is to promote the conceptual and philosophical richness of the Vaishnava tradition in their texts. The volume combines normative, critical, and descriptive elements. Some chapters are philosophical in nature, thus belonging to the normative, critical side. Other chapters are more descriptive, unpacking a specific Vaishnava concept of God for future philosophical analysis and critique. Thus, not only do the chapters of the volume present and represent a diversity of Vaishnava texts and traditions, they also illuminate a variety of approaches to the concept of God. These approaches reflect the amount of philosophical and historical deliberation on the specific issues and divine attributes considered. Nevertheless, although the approaches might be diverse, all the chapters address the very same explanatory question: that defines the overall volume. And the question is, what is a particular Vaishnava concept of God? Or more specifically, what attributes, what features does God possess according to a particular Vaishnava textual source or tradition? Other related questions of interest addressed in the volume are the following. What kind of monotheism, if any, is implied in a Vaishnava concept of God? What is God's relationship to the world? What are the implications of God having a form or possessing attributes such as beauty, perfection, immutability, immanence, transcendence? How does any particular Vaishnava concept of God relate to other Vaishnava concepts of God or to other conceptions of deity? And finally, what is the internal structure of a Vaishnava concept of God? Combining normative / critical and descriptive approaches in the same volume seems pertinent for at least two reasons. First, cross-cultural philosophy of religion is still a new field of investigation. One of its challenges has been to combine the rigor and method of philosophy, in particular analytical philosophy, with the depth that the study of worldly religion traditions, particularly Indian traditions, requires. A perhaps fair criticism sometimes raised against some fields within analytic philosophy is that there is a tendency to oversimplify the complex subjects required by philosophical inquiry. Indian traditions in general, and Vaishnava traditions in particular, are complex traditions. They are, for instance, historically, culturally, and philologically connected with countless other traditions, the study of which requires specialized and competent knowledge. Mindful of all that, this volume pursues a mixed approach, containing contributions from philosophers as well as from Indian studies scholars. Second, as shown above, the question of what is a specific Vaishnava concept of God, which is at least partially descriptive, takes precedence over any other philosophical question. Thus, rather than being competing approaches, the normative / critical approach and the descriptive approach can be seen as complementary. So this volume is an initial exploration into the Vaishnava concept of God, and so is divided into two main sections that represent a snapshot of the variety of concepts of God applicable to Vaishnavism. The chapters address 4 of the most famous texts that Vaishnavas appeal to, and a selection of 8 of the better-known Vaishnava traditions. The first section, which is entitled God in Vaishnava texts, looks at concept of God found in 4 of the canonical Vaishnava texts: the Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavata Purana, the Jayakya Samhita, and the Mahabharata. The second section of the volume, God in Vaishnava traditions, look at concepts of God found in several Vaishnava traditions in their respective key theologians. The Alvars, as well as 5 Vaishnava schools: the Sri Vaishnava school, the Madhva tradition, the Marga tradition, the Pusti Marga tradition, and the Chaitanya Vaishnava tradition, and 2 contemporary ones, those founded by Ramakrishna and Swami Bhaktivedanta, are considered. And that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. I don't know if you have time for discussion, for questions, but anyway, thank you. Hare Krishna.
Immense words of gratitude, Professor Ricardo Silvestre. It's 8:30 a.m.